Thank you for joining us for the DAMES webinar series. At DAMES, Differently Abled Mothers Empowerment Society, we strive to empower parents raising children who have a disability by providing educational webinars like this one. If you want more information, you can check out DAMES at www.damesusa.com and watch more webinars like this. Enjoy. Hello, Dames members. I am so thrilled to have you here with us today for today's webinar. Today, we have Will Jones from Into the Spectrum Services, and he is going to give us a breakdown of Into the Spectrum, what they do, how they do ABA, kind of the history of ABA, and a little bit about autism, the diagnosis, what it means, and how ABA helps us parents kind of with those behavior challenges that we have with our children who have autism. Will, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And thank you to everybody in the group. Again, we're really excited to share some insight on our services as well as some of the history of ABA and challenges we've seen in the past and what we've done to improve things here in current day. So just to start, I can give a little background on myself. Again, my name is Will Jones. I'm the Director of Human Resources for Into the Spectrum Services. We provide ABA therapy both in-home as well as in school for children ages 1 to 18. Within my role, so I work directly with the leadership team for Into the Spectrum Services, mainly working on maintaining our company culture, our strategy, our business initiatives, as well as onboarding our new families, handling our employee development, conducting leadership trainings, and ultimately handling all of our HIPAA compliance and all the information that goes on with onboarding our new families. So our agenda for today, again, I'm going to give a brief overview of autism for those who aren't as familiar. Visit more of the origin of ABA, talk through some of the foundation of what has brought ABA to what it is now, modern ABA teaching strategies, some of the curriculums currently used, delivery models for ABA services, and then again, ending on more of our methodology and what we feel we're doing to change some of the stigma of ABA practices of the past. So just to jump right in, again, for folks who aren't as familiar with autism, autism spectrum disorder refers to a broad range of conditions according to the DSM-5 criteria. This criteria changes about every 5 years or so, but currently it is characterized by challenges with social skills such as emotional reciprocity, deficiency in nonverbal communication, abnormalities in eye contact, maintaining and understanding relationships, restrictive and repetitive behaviors, inflexible adherence to routines, fixated interests, hyperactivity to sensory input, or unusual interests in the environment. So again, kind of a broad understanding of the disorder, but really to pinpoint, I guess, what autism really means is really to understand the spectrum, because it can mean so many different things, and each individual child or adult can have a number of different deficiencies, and it's important to understand kind of what that looks like. So I did want to show an illustration of the spectrum, because as you can see, there's a number of different disorders that could apply to any child or adult with autism spectrum disorder. So we may see folks who have higher functioning in language and motor skills, but they may have challenges with executive functioning, decision-making, perception, etc. So it's important to understand that each individual who has autism is going to have different deficiencies and may need support in different areas. So as far as the cause of autism, frankly, we really don't know the cause of autism. What we do know are there are differences in the brain, structural abnormalities in social and executive functioning regions. And I've listed those below for you. Common traits for autism I guess to start, so one common misconception of autism is that folks suffering with autism have lower IQ. And that's not necessarily true. In fact, sometimes individuals with autism can have higher IQ. They just may have deficiencies in certain areas of the brain, to where they may be high functioning in some areas. They may have deficiencies such as social skills, pragmatic language, executive functions, regulating emotions, theory of mind, and motor planning. So we need to identify what those deficiencies are, and create effective programs to help cope with those deficiencies, and really just come up with a plan that's going to help them be as independent and functional as possible within society. Some common disorders that occur with autism. We see anxiety being a big piece. This is actually part of our practice with Into the Spectrum services that we focus very heavily in, identifying anxiety and how that contributes to behaviors within autistic children in particular. We see obsessive compulsive disorder, also known as OCD, depression, oppositional defiant disorder, and ADHD. So again, commonly, once an individual is diagnosed with autism, a lot of times they lean towards ABA therapy, also known as applied behavior analysis. So I wanted to take some time to define ABA, talk through some of the origins of ABA, and ultimately what some of the controversy has been from its origin, and what we've done today to learn from that controversy and come up with better methods of teaching. So for applied behavioral analysis, it's a type of therapy that focuses on improving specific behaviors, such as social skills, communication, reading, academics, as well as adaptive learning skills. So those will be motor dexterity, a lot of your common household skills, whether that's hygiene, grooming, domestic capabilities, and then ultimately, as you grow into adulthood, learning job competence, punctuality, how to maintain, again, an independent life as an adult, maintaining those life skills. So looking at the origin of ABA, Dr. Ivor Lovaas is commonly known as somewhat of the founder of applied behavior analysis. However, there are numerous other psychiatrists and psychologists that have influenced his work, one being Pavlov, who most people are familiar with. But really, he was the first to put on paper the conceptual idea of what applied behavioral analysis is. So again, in the late 50s and early 60s, he had his first academic publications. From there, he conducted a study with 20 children studying applied behavior analysis. There were some critical variables that he was looking at, mostly being intensive treatment, family involvement, and age of the child. And from that study, determined that early intensive home-based intervention was the most effective form of applied behavior analysis. Still a common idea of practice today as far as having that emphasis on early intervention. So again, from that 1973 study, started to gain lots of popularity and credibility within the academic community, and took things further to study for the next 15 years, a study of 40 children in which he published his study in 1987. This 1987 was really what solidified the legitimacy of applied behavioral analysis, and a lot of the teachings from that study are what are still applied today. So what he found was that children with early intensive intervention had lasting gains in intellectual, social, emotional, and educational skills. So really the first true academic study proving the overall effects of ABA therapy. And again, so with the development that they've seen with ABA, there was also some stigma that was involved with Lovaas' study. And some of these are still looked at today, depending on how ABA is conducted within the industry. First and foremost, punishment was a piece of his therapy that quickly was noticed, particularly within the media, and brought to light. So some of his practices included punishments such as even as severe as electric shock therapy, loud noises, slaps, etc. There was an article in the late 70s, Scream, Slaps, and Love, published by Life magazine, that really brought this to light and again was kind of the first negative look at ABA and questioning the morals and ethical nature of what that therapy is. Another area that Lovaas focused on was normalization, making his subjects appear as normal as possible, discouraging behaviors such as stimming and other behaviors that may be necessary for children or adults with autism to dispel their energy and anxiety. So really trying to curb those behaviors to cure autism versus looking at the root cause and how we can create more of a therapeutic experience to where they're comfortable in their own environment, comfortable with their own bodies. Standardization was another piece that since his findings, we have learned one size does not fit all for the therapy. We need to look at the child's age, their development, again, looking back at the spectrum as far as where those deficiencies are, what are areas we need to focus on heavier than others, and then ultimately force compliance. This is a piece that unfortunately we do still see in ABA therapy today in some practices, but again, forcing a child to complete a certain task without taking into account their comfortability or well-being, working through programs without breaks, or just not evaluating their overall feelings towards the practice, just trying to accomplish those programs to get through therapy for that day. I can tell you with our practice, that's a piece we focus heavily in, is looking at characteristics such as anxiety, energy, et cetera, and evaluating our programs to tailor that to each individual's need, to where we're not forcing any of those therapies on them if that day it may not be the right fit and we need to tailor things differently. So I'll get into that a bit later in the presentation, but certainly a key focus of ours. So to look at some of the modern ABA teaching strategies, again, going from Lovaas to what is now practiced today, both in clinic as well as in home, modern strategies include discrete trial training, probably the most common form of ABA. You have natural environment training, NET, early intensive behavioral intervention, pivotal response training, and verbal behaviors. So we'll take a closer look at each of these. So with DTT, again, this is probably most commonly practiced. This is where you're teaching a series of trials to teach each step of a desired behavior or response. So when you look at most ABA programs, they're typically using DTT to teach life skills, teach verbal skills, etc. So lessons are broken down to their simplest part, and positive reinforcement is used to reward correct answers or behaviors. Next is NET. NET is probably most commonly used within our practice. So this is used when skills are taught or generalized within a natural environment or out in a real life setting, opposed to a more formal or clinic setting. So working either in home, in the school, in community centers, to where children are in a more natural environment, to where they're learning alongside their peers, alongside their families, and within their own home, whether that's life skills, verbal skills, etc. Next is early intensive behavioral intervention. So this is typically used in younger children, either younger than the age of 5 or age of 3. EIBI uses a highly structured teaching approach to build positive behaviors, such as social communication, and reduce unwanted behaviors. This typically takes place one-on-one in an adult to child environment. So typically working either with a registered behavioral technician or a BCBA, a board certified behavior analyst. And I can get into those terms later down the presentation here. Next, we have pivotal response training. So pivotal response aims to increase child's motivation to learn, monitor their own behavior, and initiate communication with others. Positive changes in these behaviors are believed to have widespread effects on other behaviors. So focusing more on the behavior itself and how to channel that to create more of a positive change in those other behaviors. And lastly, verbal behavior. Verbal behavior is a type of ABA that focuses specifically on verbal skills. A lot of children and adults with autism have trouble verbally. We even see nonverbal individuals that just really struggle with communication, to where we may need to rely on signs or different methods of communication to really allow them to express themselves. A lot of these children don't have an outlet initially on how to express how they're feeling or what they need. They're somewhat trapped to where we can teach them those skills to where they can better express themselves to what they want and alleviate some of those frustrations. So looking at some common curriculums, again, there's certainly more outside of these three, but these are three commonly used within the industry. We have Floor Time, the Early Denver Start Model, and Peak. So when looking at Floor Time, it's somewhat self-explanatory within the name, but really getting down on the floor with a child, playing and interacting at that child's level. So this can be done either with ABA staff, whether that's a registered behavior technician or a BCBA, or even with parents. So getting down on their level, taking interest in their play, and ultimately using that as a tool to help teach them. So 6 key milestones that contribute to Floor Time. We're looking at self-regulation and interest in the world, intimacy and engagement in relationships, two-way communication, complex communication, again, using those tools to communicate better with the children, emotional ideas, and emotional thinking. Next is the Early Start Denver model. This particular model has gained a lot of popularity recently over the past few years and is implemented, at least here locally in the Phoenix market, quite heavily. But this is a behavioral therapy used for children usually between ages of 12 to 48 months. So again, focusing heavily on that early intervention ideal. So this can be where parents and therapists work together to use play to build positive and fun relationships. Through play and joint activities, the child is encouraged to boost language, social, and cognitive skills. So we see this model being used in the clinic to where they're working alongside their peers in more of a natural environment, as well as in home to where they may be with brothers and sisters, or again, just one-on-one with the parents and therapists practicing these strategies. So again, this model is based on an understanding of normal toddler learning and development. So evaluating not only the condition itself, but also taking into account the age range and understanding that these are young children and understanding where they should be with their learning and development amongst their peers, and using that as a tool to gauge how the therapy is working, and somewhat of a litmus test on how to evaluate their development. It's focused on building positive relationships. Teaching occurs during natural play and everyday activities, and uses play to encourage interaction and communication. So figuring out what those stimulants are and relying on those to keep kids engaged during the therapy practices. And lastly, we have PEAK. So PEAK stands for Promoting Emergence of Advanced Knowledge. This therapy is highly based on verbal behavior. So focusing on that verbal behavior approach, but taking it one step further to help teach how to make relationships within concepts. Not only why we're speaking in this way, but what are the relationships behind that, and getting more conceptual in our thinking and helping teaching those decision-making strategies. So when looking at ABA delivery models, traditionally there's two types. So we have in-home ABA therapy and center-based ABA therapy. Somewhat self-explanatory, but I did want to talk through each in a bit of detail and talk through some of the advantages that we see within each delivery model. So first, looking at in-home ABA therapy. Again, this therapy is traditionally handled in-home. For our services, we do both in-home as well as in school. So depending on the age range of the child, again, we'll be working in-home or going into daycares, preschools, elementary school, depending on the age range of the child. But the focus of this is to keep them within their own natural environment and maintaining that same natural schedule. Some of the advantages of in-home is parent involvement. Parents get to watch the session. They get to see the staff being accountable for the programs, the services being promised, and ultimately getting that parent training to where when the RBT or BCBA staff may not be on site, they're taking in some of those same strategies and therapies to where they can apply that on their own. It gives the children the ability to learn daily living and self-help skills. So this may be teeth brushing, hygiene, toiletry skills, etc. They're learning that in their own home, in their own environment, where they're comfortable. They understand the surroundings and they can come up with that routine and have that familiarity versus being, potentially in a clinic setting to where it may be a bit more foreign than their own home. Being able to socialize with family members and neighbors, using those programs in line with brothers and sisters, family members, to where, again, it feels less of a clinical study and more of a natural progression in their learning behavior. And again, being able to keep their regular schedule. So if they're in school, we'll be going in school with them and maintaining that same routine versus maybe going to a center to where things are more foreign and it's breaking up that daily routine that they may be used to already. So looking at center-based, there's certainly advantages to centers as well. It's going to be a more structured learning environment. They'll be working with most likely a larger team of BCBA and RBT staff members. So getting different perspective from each staff member, access to practice skills with other kids who are there. So again, depending on the child's family routine, they may not have as much interaction with other children. So giving them that opportunity to play with others, to interact with others, have that socialization can be really helpful. Receiving group instruction, and again, the convenience of being able to drop your child off in a safe environment. They're going to be in an environment where they're learning valuable skills. They're going to be with staff members who are trained to be able to handle any situations that may arise specific to autism disorder and ultimately just being in a safe place while maybe a family member does need to go to work or does have other obligations. They can trust that their kid is going to be in a safe environment. So after looking at the different curriculums, different delivery models, et cetera, I did want to take a bit of time just to go through our model and our approach towards ABA and what we're trying to do to change some of the expectations of what ABA is currently. Again, there's been a lot of progress since its foundation and certainly a lot of amazing organizations that are implementing new and innovative strategies. But for us, a big thing that we're looking at is more of that forced compliance approach. So for us, we take a very naturalistic, holistic approach to where we're trying to eliminate that anxiety and some of that fear that comes into play with ABA therapy. What we've noticed over the years is a lot of folks that have gone through ABA, have trauma and have PTSD from more of that structure and more of that forced compliance approach to implementing ABA programs. So we thought, how can we do this different? How can we do this better? So for us, we're really looking at a couple key things. We're creating familiarity and comfortability within the session. So working with them in their own home, working with them in the schools, keeping that same routine. And then also building that trust and relationships with our staff members and the families we work with. We adhere to a one-to-one model with our RBTs, meaning that they are paired one-on-one with one individual child. The purpose of this, again, most people familiar with ABA therapy understand the importance of pairing and what a difference that can make in being able to implement programs. Once you have that trust, once you have that relationship, they're going to be at ease and be able to relieve that anxiety to where they're with a familiar person who they can trust. So we try to eliminate any changes in that variable to where it's the same individual coming in day out. They're not seeing new team members rotate from time to time to where they have that familiarity. They have that sense of comfortability when starting a session. I did want to take some time to look at our methodology because it is somewhat unique to our practice. So one thing that we like to do differently than a lot of other ABA services is really understanding the emotions behind the behavior. So understanding the why. Our goal is not only identify those problem behaviors, but diagnose why those behaviors are occurring. We focus on redirecting problem behaviors into appropriate responses, not suppressing those behaviors. If you look at a behavior such as stimming, these are behaviors that are necessary for children or adults with autism to get out that energy, to get out that anxiety. They need to regulate their nervous system. And if you're to suppress those behaviors, it's just going to come out in a different form. So rather than suppressing those behaviors, what can we do to redirect those in a healthy way that may be more socially acceptable, or give them the tools to where they can navigate these situations and still have that release, but in more of a natural way to where it's appropriate, whether they're in a job in the future or in school, to where they can regulate those behaviors on their own. So I did want to give an example. I think this will be the easiest way to break down how we look at some of these behaviors. So again, similar to stimming, we'll be looking at verbal scripting. Again, this is another common forum to where we see a lot of children and adults expressing that anxiety and energy. So the definition, a speech utterance that is repeated. It can be a syllable, a word, or a phrase in high frequency with little awareness of the meaning. So for this example, we'll call the boy T. So for T, he will make non-functional noises such as ooh or ah. And again, we need to understand, why is he doing this? So first, like I had mentioned before, we need to respect the need for T to get that stimulation out. We can't suppress that because he's working to regulate his nervous system. If we suppress that, again, we're just going to see that behavior come out in a different form. So for us, we need to hypothesize two reasons why T is engaging in this behavior. Is he excited or is he anxious? And we need to treat each of those differently. So by identifying it, we can figure out what our approach is going to be to help regulate that behavior and, again, channel that into a more socially appropriate response. So again, in this example, the first step is to identify, is it anxiety or excitement? And we'll give examples for both. So there's clues to let us know whether this is excitement or anxiety. Exciting clues could be them playing on an iPad, playing with dinosaurs, smiling, making comments on a show. Where anxiety, we typically see more traits of pacing or running around the room crying even while playing, heavy breathing, asking a person to go away, go home, sit down, or seclude themselves from a situation. And there may be others. Again, we'll need to learn that as we get to know the individual and recognize those traits. So what are we doing once we notice what the trait is? So for this example, we'll look at, what do we do if he's excited? There's a couple different approaches we can take, but we'll want to interrupt the scripting behavior and redirect to make specific comments about his play or show he's watching. And this might not be functionally equivalent. It may take time to figure out how to redirect that behavior, but we want to recognize why he's excited and recognize that and make sure that we're intervening to give them the tools to comprehend that excitement. Another form may be giving them a warning or a consequence that if he can't be quiet, that we may need to take a break from that activity. So teaching them that decision making to understand that this may not be appropriate and we may need to take a break. If we're looking at the anxious behaviors, we need to help them calm down and use a coping strategy. And it may take time to figure out what that coping strategy is, but we'll look at examples such as taking a break from that activity, using a weighted blanket, pillow squeezes. There's a number of different physical tools, whether it's stress balls or different toys that can help alleviate that stress. And we'll need to figure out what those are and implement those regularly to create a solid strategy. And ultimately figuring out how we are helping. So I think data integrity is super important when looking at these behaviors. If we're looking at a child who's anxious, for instance, understanding what works and what doesn't, and making sure that we're documenting that to where we come up with a system of tools and strategies that's going to be effective for that individual. Because again, it's not going to be the same for each individual child. So just as an example, I've included a data sheet here. So if we look at all the strategies, we're going to document what's working and what's not. That way we can figure out what those coping mechanisms are, whether they're excited or anxious, and rely on those tools to create consistency to where ultimately they can become more independent and rely on those tools themselves without us having to dictate what that action may be or how we can steer them in the right direction. Ultimately, the goal is to get them to recognize that themselves and apply those behaviors in a more healthy way. So lastly, for this presentation, I'd really like to invite everybody to get to know us a bit better. Again, this is just a brief insight on our specific strategy. And there's certainly a lot of other wonderful companies, at least here in the Phoenix area, that are implementing similar strategies. But for us, again, I know our naturalistic and holistic approach is a bit different. And if you're ever interested in learning more about that approach, I certainly encourage everybody to take a look at our website as well as our YouTube page. Our company was actually founded based off of our YouTube series. Our clinical director has worked for a number of companies here locally in the Phoenix market and ultimately started that YouTube page as a resource for parents who are maybe on wait lists for ABA or may not have ABA services within their community. So it's a great tool for parents at home to implement those strategies on their own and learn more about us and how we approach the therapy as a whole. So I certainly encourage everybody to look at that if interested, as well as you can reach out to myself. I'm always available via email or phone call to talk through this strategy in general, how this can be implemented at home on your own, or if you ever are interested in services, talking through what that model would look like and giving more information in that regard. But I really appreciate the time and certainly I feel fortunate to be on this platform to talk with everybody today. And I want to thank Michelle as well for letting me speak to the group. And again, we're hoping to make a difference every day. And the more we can share this information and learn from this information is going to help do that. So I really do appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you so much, Will. That was a lot of really great information. So I think that for people who are fresh to an autism diagnosis, that was a great overview of what ABA is, where it started, and I think where it's transitioning to. Mm-hmm. I have 2 children who get ABA therapy. I have 2 therapists in my house right now as we're doing the webinar. And I have yet to see a presentation where everything was really laid out the way that you laid it out with the different modalities and methodologies that are employed during ABA. So thank you. That was a really great overview of what ABA is.
Of course, and it's certainly a lot of content to digest. So I'm hoping that this presentation can be somewhat of a roadmap to where individuals can learn and research on their own to where what may best fit for their family and for their kids' needs. And again, I'll always be here as a resource as well if you have any questions specific to our services or our delivery model, and how we're here to help.
Yeah, I know. I like took a lot of notes, and I'm always just amazed at what you can learn from something that you live with all of the time. The early Denver START model, that sounds fascinating. I've never heard of that before. And with children being diagnosed so young now, I can see
Mhm.
where that's implemented a lot more often now these days.
Absolutely, it's certainly a model gaining quite a bit of popularity, and something that we build within our approach as well. I think one thing I didn't mention as far as those curriculums, our clinical director, we don't take from one specific curriculum. We try to implement the best of everything. The early start Denver model being one of them. So there's certainly a lot to learn within each of those curriculums. I definitely encourage the group to look at each individually and do their research because there's a lot to learn in each criteria.
Definitely. I like that your company employs a one-to-one model. I'm not going to say what company my children work with, but they have always had more of a rotational feel of the therapist. And since the pandemic, they've moved to a one-to-one model for safety
Mhm.
reasons. And the explosion of growth that my son has had during the pandemic is just astronomical because now he knows and he trusts and he works well with his one therapist instead of three or four trying to juggle three or four people's different expectations of him. So I love that you guys already do a one-to-one model, and that has been kind of your guiding principle since you started.
Yeah, it certainly, to your point, it helps a lot with the pandemic, just easing people's fears as far as comfortability, having that consistency and lack of exposure in that regard. But ultimately, that the pairing is so important. And when you can cut down on that time of pairing per session to where um, they walk in the door and there's that familiarity, there's that comfortability to where they can get right to it and get into session without having to pair with a new individual each time.
Mhm.
Just creates for more efficiency, creates for more trust, and more fun. I mean, that's a big piece of our business is make sure our kids are having fun and they're at ease when they're not only learning but they're experiencing new things every day.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I like that ABA has shifted from this forced compliance to a non-forced compliance. I know that within the rules for my children, it's like they can say no. And you have to respect that they said no. And if you can't get them on board, then you got to figure out how to get them on board with what you're doing. And so it
Absolutely.
sounds like that's what you guys employ also.
Yeah, and it's about employing creativity. If a child is not in the mood for snack that day and would rather be coloring or doing another activity, it's recognizing those behaviors and identifying those stresses or those anxieties or those excitements and rolling with it and making sure that they're staying comfortable. And if we need to divert to a different program that's more in line with their thought process or their emotions, that we're able to do that and that we've trained our staff to be able to pivot as needed.
That's awesome. I also really appreciate that ABA has moved away from this normalization approach too. That they're really recognizing that our children are all different and unique, and that those differences should be celebrated and they shouldn't be forced to fit into a mold of what we think normal is. So
Yeah,
I really appreciate that change in ABA.
absolutely. And it's a fine balance between, how do we teach these social skills to where they can be independent and be the best versions of themselves to where they can live a fulfilling life, but also not changing those emotions and behaviors that make them who they are. Some of the kids we work with are so special in ways that kids without autism will never be, and that shouldn't be discouraged or looked down upon. To what we discussed earlier, I mean, the IQ within children with autism or adults with autism is oftentimes so high, and we just need to recognize how to celebrate that and make the most out of creating those tools to give them that independent life to where they can show that on their own.
Absolutely. So coming from a science background, I've done so much research on autism, and their brains, like you said, are absolutely amazing. I mean, they have far more neural connections than you and I do. And it's just, how do we harness all of that capability that they have and make sure that they can express who they are and all of the knowledge and uniqueness that they have going on, because they do see the world differently, and it shouldn't be
Absolutely.
squashed, it should be celebrated, right?
Absolutely, and there's a lot to learn on the other side of the table as well. The takeaways we receive from our children are just as beneficial to what we're teaching them, and I
Yeah.
think that's the reason why folks get into the industry is they recognize that there's a lot to be learned on both sides.
Well, I really want to thank you, Will, for coming today. And I'm so glad that you shared your contact information here so that if anybody wants to contact you guys for services, your email address is there. And do you guys have a waiting list right now? What does service availability look like in your company at this point?
So we actually are currently accepting new families. So if
Awesome.
anybody is interested or has been recently diagnosed, we'd be happy to talk through that process. We do have a questionnaire on our website as well, just to help us pinpoint where you're at and where your child may be at, and we can set up follow-ups from there and discuss that consultation process.
Awesome. That's really wonderful. Thank you so much, Will. And I really appreciate all of the knowledge. Like I said, I have two kids with ABA and I learned so much during this presentation. So thank you for putting it together for us today.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
All right, we'll see you later.
Thanks.
We hope that you enjoyed this webinar. If you want access to more informational educational webinars like this one, think about becoming a DAMES member. You can go to www.damesusa.com and get instant access to over 25 webinars just like this. We hope that you become a member, and we look forward to seeing you live at our next educational webinar. Have a great day!